You ever had one of those moments when life feels like a bad sitcom? Well, that's exactly what happened to me last summer when my HOA decided to call 911 on me for fishing on my own lake. Yeah, you heard that right. My private lake, my land, and my boat. But here's the plot twist. The emergency call they made came straight to my office. I'm the 911 dispatcher for our rural county. So when the call came in, I had no idea I was about to answer a complaint about myself. It was a Saturday morning, peaceful as could be. The kind of morning that feels like the world finally remembered how to slow down. The air was cool, touched by that gentle mountain chill that clings to the early hours, and the mist coming off the lake drifted lazily, like smoke from a candle. I could hear the faint hum of crickets fading into the distance as the sun began to rise over the treeline. The whole world seemed wrapped in silence. No phones ringing, no engines, no chaos. Just peace. I took my coffee, hot, strong, and freshly brewed, down the worn dirt path that led to the lake behind my ranch. It's not just any lake. It's my lake. About 10 acres of still, glassy water that I've poured my heart and soul into over the years. On mornings like that, it looked almost unreal. The surface was so calm it reflected the sky perfectly, like a mirror for heaven itself. Every ripple from a lazy fish breaking the surface felt like a tiny reminder that life out here still had rhythm, even without the noise of the city. You see, I'd worked hard for that place. Real hard. Years of double shifts, missed vacations, and cold dinners reheated after midnight. Every fence post, every plank on that dock, I'd put there myself. I'd spent entire weekends hauling rocks, planting trees, and battling mud just to turn a patch of wild land into a little slice of heaven. And when the paperwork was finally signed, when I held that deed in my hand with my name printed across the top, it wasn't just land. It was freedom. So that morning, sitting at the end of my dock with my fishing pole in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other, I felt like the richest man alive. The sun climbed higher, painting streaks of gold over the pine trees that surrounded the lake. The scent of dew and pine needles filled the air. Birds sang from the branches, and the gentle creak of my wooden dock rocked in time with the lapping water. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could ruin that moment. Or so I thought. Out of nowhere, I heard the distant crunch of gravel. At first, I figured it was one of the ranch hands heading out early, maybe checking the fencing line. But as the sound grew closer, I realized it wasn't the slow rumble of a truck I recognized. It was sharper, tighter, more entitled, if that makes sense. When I looked up for my coffee, I saw a white SUV inching its way down my private gravel road. You could tell just from the way it crawled along that it didn't belong there. The kind of slow, cautious driving people do when they're on someone else's property, but want to act like they have a reason to be there. The SUV came to a stop near the split rail fence by my dock, and the driver's side door swung open. And that's when she stepped out, Karen. Now, if you've ever dealt with an HOA before, you already know the type. Mid-50s, hair so tightly curled it could repel bullets, sunglasses big enough to cover half her face, and that clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a badge of authority. You could practically feel the self-importance radiating off her. Karen was the president of the HOA from the housing development down the road, a gated community called Whispering Pines. Don't let the pretty name fool you. The only thing whispering there were the complaints being passed from one nosy neighbor to another. Those folks had rules for everything. The color of your shutters, the height of your grass, even how long you could leave your trash bins out after pickup day. And apparently, they thought their rules extended beyond their own property line. Karen started her march toward me like a general walking into battle. Each step kicked up a puff of dust from my road. She had that determined chin up. I'm about to ruin someone's weekend, stride that could make anyone's coffee turn bitter. I swear, if confidence alone could issue fines, I'd have been broke before she even reached me. I didn't move. I just sat there on the dock, sipping my coffee, watching her approach like I was watching a storm roll in. Part of me was curious. What could she possibly want out here? The HOA boundary ended a quarter-mile up the road. I paid my taxes. My property was clearly marked, and there wasn't a single sign that said, Whispering Pines, anywhere near my land. But Karen wasn't the type to let reality interfere with her sense of control. She stopped at the edge of the dock, adjusted her sunglasses, and gave me that disapproving head tilt that could make a grown man feel like he'd tracked mud across a clean floor. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice laced with that syrupy politeness that really just hides a threat. "You can't fish here." I blinked, wondering if I'd heard her right. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "This lake," she said, gesturing grandly with her clipboard, "belongs to the HOA community. It's private property for our residents only." I couldn't help but laugh. Not a loud laugh, just that kind of quiet, disbelieving chuckle you make when someone tells you something so ridiculous you have to double-check they're serious. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "this lake is on my ranch. I own this land and the lake with it." She frowned like I just told her the earth was flat. "No, you must be mistaken. Our community map clearly shows the lake as part of Whispering Pines. It's for residents and guests only." I took a long sip of my coffee, more to buy time than anything else. "Well, that's funny," I said, "because I've got the deed sitting in my safe inside that house right up there." I pointed toward my cabin at the top of the hill, its tin roof glinting in the sun. "And that deed says this lake, this dock, and everything around it belongs to me." Karen pursed her lips, looking down at her clipboard like it might magically rewrite itself. "I'll have to verify that," she said sharply. "We've had problems with trespassers before." "Ma'am," I said, "the only trespasser I see right now is standing on my dock." That's when her eyes narrowed, and she lifted her phone like she was about to pull the pin on a grenade. "Fine," she snapped. "If you're going to be uncooperative, I'll let the authorities handle this. I'm calling 911. And that's when I realized two things at once. First, that this woman genuinely believed she could call the police to kick someone off their own land. And second, that she had no idea who she was calling. Because, as fate would have it, I'm not just some guy who owns a ranch. I'm also the 911 dispatcher for the county. So there I was, sitting at the end of my dock, coffee in one hand, fishing pole in the other, watching an HOA president call me into my own office to report me for trespassing on my own lake. I couldn't have written a funnier script if I tried. Karen strutted up like she owned the place, chin high, sunglasses glinting in the sun, that clipboard tucked tight under her arm like a sheriff's badge from the suburbs. You could practically hear her heels clicking against the dock, even though she was wearing flat sandals. Every step she took screamed authority, or at least, the kind of authority that only exists in HOA meetings and neighborhood Facebook groups. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone dripping with forced politeness. "You can't fish here. This lake belongs to the HOA community." Now, I've had my fair share of run-ins with HOA folks before. Usually it's the smaller stuff, someone complaining that my fence was too rustic, or that my old pickup truck didn't match the community aesthetic. But this was next level. This woman had marched all the way down my private gravel road, through a locked gate that clearly said private property, just to tell me I couldn't be on my own land. I looked at her for a long second, trying to figure out if she was serious or just lost. She wasn't blinking. Her lips were pursed tight, the way people do when they're convinced they're about to teach you a lesson. I set my fishing pole down, stood up, and brushed the dust off my jeans. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this lake is on my private property. I own the land under it, around it, and every inch of this dock you're standing on." She frowned, tilting her head like she'd just heard me speaking another language. "That can't be right," she said. "Our map shows that this lake is part of the Whispering Pines community. It's a shared amenity for residents and guests only. You're trespassing." Now, there's something about that word, trespassing, that hits different when it's coming from someone standing on your land. My patience was holding on by a thread, but I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really did have a bad map or some old information. So I walked over to my tackle box, pulled out the plastic folder where I kept copies of my property documents, something I'd learned to carry around because of previous misunderstandings with this same HOA. I unfolded the map and pointed to the line, the bold black border that clearly showed the entire lake sitting right inside my property boundaries. "See this line here?" I said. "Everything inside this section including this water, belongs to me. This isn't HOA land. This isn't public land. This is private ranch property. Karen squinted at the paper for maybe half a second before waving her hand dismissively, like she was brushing away a fly. Those maps are outdated, she said. Our association had the lake surveyed last year. It's definitely part of community now. Now, that was interesting, because unless the HOA had somehow purchased the land out from under me without my knowledge, which is impossible, that claim made 0 sense. I took a slow breath and said, "Ma'am, unless your HOA can produce a deed filed with the county that says otherwise, you're standing on private property. My private property." That's when her polite mask cracked. Her voice sharpened. "You can't just claim land because you say so. The HOA has rules, and everyone has to follow them. If you're going to use the lake, you'll need to pay the community dues and submit a usage request through the board." I stared at her, genuinely baffled. Pay dues? For my lake? I couldn't help but laugh. "Lady, I don't even live in your HOA. You can't enforce your rules here." Karen crossed her arms, clutching that clipboard tighter, like it was her sword in this suburban crusade. "That's what everyone says when they're caught doing something they shouldn't," she said. "But don't worry, we'll get this sorted out. I'll just call 911 and let the authorities handle it." And before I could even open my mouth, she whipped out her smartphone like it was a weapon. Now, I've seen a lot of people use their phones to record, to threaten, or to Google something mid-argument, but Karen? She was dialing with righteous fury. Her fingers tapped the screen like she was activating a launch sequence. "Ma'am," I said, holding up a hand, "you really don't need to do that. I'm telling you the truth. This lake isn't part of your HOA. I can show you the deed, the plat survey, and the tax statement. It's all here." But she wasn't listening. Her jaw was set. Her sunglasses reflected the lake like two cold mirrors, and her voice came out crisp and commanding. "Hello? Yes, I need to report a man trespassing on HOA property. He's refusing to leave." Now, here's the thing. I've dealt with angry people before. I work in emergency communications. I've heard people yell, cry, panic, threaten, you name it. But watching this woman try to summon the police on me, while standing on my own dock, was surreal. I could almost feel the irony building like thunder in the distance. I tried one last time. "Karen, listen. You're calling 911 over something that isn't even a crime. You're wasting their time." She shot me a glare that could melt paint. "You don't tell me what's a crime," she said. "The HOA has rights, and the police will make sure you understand them." At that point, I knew there was no reasoning with her. The confidence radiating off that woman was bulletproof. You could have told her the sky was blue, and she'd have pulled out a rulebook that said it was HOA-approved teal. So I stepped back, folded my arms, and decided to let her dig her own hole. She turned slightly, still on the phone, pacing like a detective at a crime scene. "Yes, officer," she said dramatically. "He's a tall man, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. He's being confrontational and refusing to leave the HOA lake. Yes, I feel unsafe." That last line nearly made me laugh out loud. Unsafe. The only dangerous thing in that moment was her sense of entitlement. But I bit my tongue. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "you're free to make your call. Just make sure to tell them exactly where you are, because when they ask for the address, they'll see this isn't HOA land." She ignored me completely, pacing faster, raising her voice like she wanted the entire forest to hear her. "I'm at the Whispering Pines Lake," she said into the phone. "You need to send someone fast. He's refusing to comply." I stood there with my arms crossed, watching her march up and down my dock, making her little emergency speech, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to embarrass herself on a whole new level. See, what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I wasn't just some random rancher. I was the guy who worked at the very dispatch center she was calling. The person on the other end of that phone? One of my co-workers. And if my luck held out, her call might just get routed to me. She finished her call with a self-satisfied sigh, tucked her phone back into her pocket, and said, "There, the police are on their way. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before breaking the rules." I smiled, trying not to show my amusement. "Oh, I'm sure this'll get sorted out just fine," I said. "You might want to stick around for it." And as she turned on her heel and stormed back toward her SUV, muttering about lawbreakers and community standards, I just sat back down, took a long sip of my coffee, and grinned. Because little did Karen know, the next voice she'd be hearing from 911 would be mine. Here's where it gets funny, really funny. The kind of funny that makes you believe the universe has a sense of humor and impeccable timing. About 15 minutes after Karen stormed off, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I figured it was just a friend or maybe a spam call. But when I looked down, it was my co-worker from the dispatch center. "Hey," he said, his voice half tired, half pleading. "Any chance you can come in for an extra shift today? Amy called out sick, and we're shorthanded." Now, I'd been looking forward to a lazy Saturday. Just me, my fishing rod, and the sound of the lake, but something in me said, why not? Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was the fact that I wanted to get out of there before Karen decided to come back with a drone and a clipboard-mounted megaphone. So I packed up my gear, finished my coffee, and took one last look at the calm, glistening water. It was peaceful again, almost like the whole scene was resetting itself after the storm of self-righteousness that had just blown through. I chuckled, shook my head, and said out loud to nobody, "Well, that was weird." Then I hopped into my truck, cranked up the engine, and headed down the winding dirt road toward town. The drive was about 20 minutes, just long enough for me to settle back into normal mode. The sun had climbed higher now, filtering through the trees, and my playlist hummed softly through the speakers. I remember thinking how nice it felt to leave the nonsense behind and get back to something predictable, like work. Little did I know, predictability was about to fly right out the window. When I pulled into the county dispatch center, everything felt routine. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the smell of burnt coffee filled the air, and the hum of radio chatter echoed from the corner consoles. I nodded at the night shift crew packing up, grabbed a headset, and slid into my seat at the main console, my little corner of chaos control. Now, if you've never worked dispatch, it's a weird balance of calm and adrenaline. 90% of the time, it's quiet. You're logging calls, answering the occasional noise complaint, or directing a deputy to a stray cow on the highway. But that other 10%? That's when everything happens at once: car wrecks, house fires, medical emergencies. The kind of stuff that gets your heart racing. I put my headset on, did the usual system check, and within minutes, I was back in the groove. My screens glowed with maps, GPS signals, and call logs. It was just another Saturday shift. Then, about 20 minutes in, a new alert flashed on my screen. Incoming 911 call. I clicked answer, cleared my throat, and went into automatic mode. 911, what's your emergency? There was a pause, just a second of silence, and then I heard a voice I recognized instantly. That voice that had echoed across my dock not even an hour ago. "Yes," she said in that same sharp, clipped tone. "I'd like to report a man trespassing and illegally fishing on the HOA lake." For a moment, my brain didn't process it. It was like hearing a bad recording of your own life. My hand froze on the mouse. My eyes flicked to the call Idaho on the screen, and sure enough, the location matched my property. Whispering Pines. The lake. My stomach did a backflip. Then it hit me all at once. It was Karen, the HOA queen herself. The same woman who'd marched onto my property not even an hour earlier to lecture me about community rules. She was calling meat about me. I felt the laugh building in my chest before I could stop it. I tried to hold it back. I really did. But it bubbled up like a soda that's been shaken too hard. I had to hit the mute button before I exploded. There I was, sitting in a government building, wearing a headset, listening to this woman rant about a suspicious man trespassing on property she didn't even own. And she was talking about me. When I finally caught my breath, I unmuted the line, keeping my voice as steady and professional as possible. "All right, ma'am," I said, slipping into my calm dispatcher tone. "Can you tell me your location?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm at the Whispering Pines Community Lake. The man is still there, I think. He's fishing, ignoring our HOA rules, and refusing to leave when asked." Her voice was full of indignation. You could almost hear her hands on her hips through the phone. I leaned back in my chair, trying not to grin too wide. All right, I said, typing notes into the system. And can you describe the individual for me? Oh, absolutely, she said, her voice crisp with self-importance. He's a tall man, maybe mid-30s, brown hair, wearing a plaid shirt, jeans, and a brown hat. He drives a silver truck. He looked very uncooperative. I nearly lost it. That was me to a T. I could have read the description straight from my own mirror. My co-workers sitting nearby started glancing over because they could see me shaking with laughter, my shoulders bouncing as I tried to keep it together. I hit mute again, turned slightly in my chair, and whispered to one of the guys across the console, "You won't believe this. She's calling 911 on me." He blinked, then started grinning. "No way." "Way," I said. "She's serious. Full-on HOA meltdown." He mouthed, "Oh my God," and had to spin his chair away so he wouldn't burst out laughing loud enough for her to hear. Meanwhile, Karen was still going strong, explaining how she'd caught me in the act and how outsiders think they can use our lake. I let her talk for a while. It was almost entertaining at this point. She spoke like she was narrating a police drama. Finally, when she paused to take a breath, I said, "All right, ma'am. I'll send a unit to check on the situation. Can I have your name for the report?" "This is Karen Matthews," she said proudly, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Of course it was. I typed it in, biting my tongue to keep from snickering. "Thank you, Ms. Matthews," I said. "And just to confirm, you said the suspect is still at the location?" "Yes," she huffed. "Or at least he was when I left. You need to make sure he's dealt with properly. We can't have people thinking they can just show up and use our lake whenever they please." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. "Understood," I said, keeping my tone professional. "We'll dispatch an officer right away to verify the situation." I ended the call, clicked over to the dispatch log, and patched the report to the next available deputy, who, by pure coincidence, happened to be my cousin Jake. I leaned over to his channel and said quietly, "Hey Jake, you're gonna love this one. HOA call at Whispering Pines. Caller's name is Karen Matthews. Claims a trespasser's fishing on her lake. The suspect description is, well, me." There was a pause, then a chuckle over the radio. "You're kidding." "Nope. Dead serious." Jake laughed. "Oh, this I gotta see." I could barely breathe from holding in the laughter. It was like watching a sitcom play out live, except I was the star and the punchline. As Jake rolled out toward my ranch, I sat back in my chair, grinning from ear to ear. Part of me couldn't believe the timing. Of all the days, of all the shifts, of all the people she could have called, she called me. And I thought, if karma had a sense of humor, this was it. I unmuted my mic, took a slow breath, and slipped right back into my professional dispatcher voice. You know the one, calm, steady, polite. The voice that says, everything's under control, even when you're 2 seconds from cracking up. "All right, ma'am," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Can you describe the suspect for me?" There was a slight rustle on the other end of the line. Then Karen spoke with conviction of someone filing a high-priority police report about world domination. "He's a tall man," she said crisply, "probably mid-30s. He's wearing a brown hat, a plaid shirt, and jeans. He drove up in a silver truck, parked near the fence, and walked straight down to the dock. He's still out there, acting like he owns the place." The way she said it, acting like he owns the place, made me snort before I could stop myself. I had to slap a hand over my mouth and hit the mute button again because, technically, she wasn't wrong. I did own the place. Every inch of it. The land, the dock, the lake, all mine. I leaned back in my chair, my shoulders shaking silently as I laughed. Across the room, one of my co-workers, Tyler, noticed and mouthed, "What's going on?" I waved him off, trying to pull myself together. When I finally unmuted again, I was composed, at least on the outside. "Understood, ma'am," I said, sounding every bit like a dispatcher taking the most serious crime in the county. "I'll send an officer to check it out. Can I have your name and a callback number, please?" Karen didn't hesitate for even a second. You could tell she'd been waiting for this moment, the moment she could drop her title like a badge of honor. "This is Karen Matthews," she said proudly, enunciating every syllable like she was announcing herself at a royal banquet. "I'm the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." Of course she was. Of course. I typed it down in the system like it was the most important case of my career, fingers flying across the keyboard, entering every little detail with a smirk on my face. Caller Karen Matthews. Role, HOA President. Complaint, male trespasser at Whispering Pines Lake. Description, tall, mid-30s, plaid shirt, brown hat, silver truck. Behavior, non-compliant. If someone else read that report later, they'd think we were dealing with a full-blown criminal. But me? I knew we were just dealing with a woman drunk on HOA power and misunderstanding bigger than her sunglasses. "Thank you, Ms. Matthews," I said smoothly. "We'll send a deputy your way shortly to investigate the situation. Please stay nearby so the responding officer can speak with you when they arrive." "Of course," she said, her voice tight with self-importance. "I'll be waiting. And please tell them to hurry. This man was very rude to me. Completely uncooperative." "Oh, I bet," I muttered under my breath, hitting mute before I let that one slip out over the air. Once I logged the call, I opened the dispatch queue and saw the next available unit. Deputy Jake Thompson, my cousin. Now, Jake isn't just family. He's also got a wicked sense of humor and the patience of a saint. We grew up together, spent our summers fishing in that very same lake long before it ever became a topic for HOA drama. If there was anyone who could handle this situation and have some fun doing it, it was him. I keyed into his channel, my grin stretching wider. "Hey, Jake," I said casually through the headset. "Got a call for you. Possible trespassing complaint at Whispering Pines." There was a pause. Then his voice crackled through, steady and alert. "Copy that. What's the nature of the complaint?" I pulled up the notes, pretending to read them like it was any other call. Caller states there's a male individual fishing at the community lake, refusing to leave when asked. Caller identifies as the HOA president, a Ms. Karen Matthews. Jake groaned audibly. "Oh, that HOA. The one that complained last month about kids riding bikes too fast." "The very same," I said, trying not to laugh. "All right," he replied, the amusement already creeping into his tone. Description of the suspect. And that's where I had to take a deep breath, because I knew what was coming next would sound ridiculous out loud. Tall male, mid-30s, brown hat, plaid shirt, silver truck. There was silence on the line for a good 3 seconds. Then Jake's voice came back, half serious, half laughing. Isn't that you?" I grinned, spinning slightly in my chair. "Bingo." "No way," he said, chuckling. "You're kidding me." "Wish I was." She called 911 to report me trespassing on my own property. I could hear him laughing through the static, trying to hold it together. "Oh man, you can't make this stuff up. You want me to head over?" "Oh, definitely," I said. "Go ahead and roll. Just, be gentle. She's convinced she's doing the Lord's work out there." "Copy that," Jake said, still laughing. "On my way." I watched the GPS tracker on my screen light up as Jake's patrol car began heading toward the ranch. Meanwhile, I sat back in my chair, hands behind my head, and stared at the dispatch board with a grin. The irony of the situation hit me like a punchline to a joke years in the making. Here I was, at my desk, wearing my county-issued uniform, logging a call about myself. Somewhere out there, Karen was standing on my dock, pacing and waiting for the cavalry to arrive, completely unaware that the man who'd just answered her 911 call was the suspect she wanted removed. I imagined her rehearsing her speech, maybe adjusting her sunglasses, preparing to make her case to the arriving officer like it was a courtroom drama. I could see her now, arms crossed, chin up, clipboard at the ready. And me, I was about to enjoy every second of what was coming next, because I knew exactly how this was going to play out. Jake wasn't just going to show up, tell her she was wrong, and leave. Oh no, he was going to make sure she felt the full weight of her mistake, gently, professionally, but with enough irony to make her rethink every HOA rule she'd ever quoted. "Hey," Jake said through the radio after a moment, his voice teasing. "Want me to take a selfie at the lake for the case file?" I laughed so hard I almost choked on my coffee. Please do. That'll make a great addition to the records. He chuckled. Copy that. En route now. When the call disconnected, I just sat there for a moment, shaking my head in disbelief. The room was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the faint murmur of other dispatchers handling real emergencies. And there I was, dispatching my own cousin to investigate a crime that didn't exist. A crime committed by me, on my own property, reported by the most dedicated HOA president this side of the Mississippi. I leaned back in my chair and said softly, mostly to myself, "Well, Karen, let's see how this goes." Then I grinned, because deep down I knew this was about to become one of the funniest stories I'd ever get to tell. Jake headed out to the ranch while I stayed on the line, watching his little GPS crawl across the county map on my dispatch screen. I could barely contain my excitement. This was about to be one for the record books. The headset crackled as Jake radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3 to 14, en route to Whispering Pines. Show me responding to a reported trespass at the community lake." "Copy that, 3 to 14, I said, keeping my tone professional but fighting back a grin. "Caller is on scene. Name's Karen Matthews. Claimed suspect is a male, mid-30s, plaid shirt, silver truck." There was a pause on the other end. Then Jake said dryly, "Oh, yes, sounds dangerous." "Extremely," I replied. "Proceed with caution." He laughed, and the radio went quiet except for the hum of his patrol car engine in the background. Now, I couldn't officially listen in on his interactions once he arrived, but since this was technically my case, and well me, I might have kept one ear on the open channel. Call it professional curiosity. The whole time, I imagined Karen pacing by the water, arms crossed, muttering about trespassers and property rights, waiting for the cavalry to arrive. She probably rehearsed what she was going to say, imagining herself as the heroic neighborhood protector. Meanwhile, Jake was grinning the whole way there, because he knew exactly what kind of show he was about to walk into. When his cruiser pulled up near the gravel road leading to my lake, the sound of tires crunching against the dirt must have been music to Karen's ears. She came marching out from behind her SUV like a soldier spotting reinforcements. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting authority, she practically power-walked toward the deputy's vehicle before he even had the chance to open the door. "Officer," she shouted, waving one arm in the air. "Over here. That's the man right there." Jake stepped out slowly, squinting toward the lake where, ironically, no one was standing. My dock was empty, my fishing gear long gone. Just the soft ripple of water and the rustle of wind in the pine trees. "Where exactly, ma'am?" Jake asked, playing dumb, though I could hear the humor in his voice through the radio mic. "There," she said, stabbing her finger toward the dock, like it had committed a crime. He was right there, fishing, trespassing, completely ignoring me. He was even drinking coffee like he owned the place. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And you said this lake belongs to your HOA community?" "Yes," she huffed, holding her clipboard out like it was proof of divine truth. "It's clearly marked on our community map. We've had trouble with outsiders before, you see. People just think they can come in and use our lake whenever they want. It's unacceptable." Jake nodded, flipping open his notepad, pretending to jot things down. Right. And you said he was a tall guy. Plaid shirt, silver truck?" "Yes, exactly. You see, I know these types. They act like they're above the rules." I told him politely to leave, but he just argued with me. He even claimed he owned the lake. Can you believe that? "Oh, I can believe it," Jake said, trying not to laugh. "So, where's the suspect now?" "I don't know," she said, frowning toward the dock. "He must have left when he saw me call you. But you can still see his tire tracks by the fence. I want him cited for trespassing immediately." "Of course," Jake said, writing something down. "Just one more thing, ma'am. You wouldn't happen to have any paperwork showing your HOA owns this lake, would you?" "Of course I do," she said proudly, flipping through her clipboard like a magician about to reveal her greatest trick. She pulled out a printed community map, glossy, color-coded, and labeled with every little parcel of land. But the problem was obvious even to a blind man. The map's property line stopped a good few hundred yards short of the lake. Jake studied it for a moment, then tilted his head. That's interesting. Karen crossed her arms. What's interesting? Well, he said slowly, according to this, your HOA boundary ends right about here. He pointed to a dotted line on the paper. And the lake, well, that's outside of it. She frowned, leaning in, clearly not expecting him to read it that closely. That can't be right. The lake's always been part of Whispering Pines. Everyone knows that. Ma'am, Jake said, keeping his tone polite but firm. This lake isn't part of your HOA. It's actually private property, owned by Mr., your last name. He's the one who pays the taxes on it every year. The silence that followed was golden. Karen's jaw dropped open just slightly. You could almost hear her mental gears grinding to a halt as she processed what he said. Wait, no. That's not possible. Jake nodded. Oh, it's very possible. I just checked our property records before coming out here. Standard procedure. This entire area belongs to him. Always has. Her face went pale. But I called 911. I reported him. He was trespassing. Jake's smirk widened just a bit. That perfect mix of amusement and disbelief. Yeah, about that, he said. You might want to sit down for this part. I beg your pardon, she said sharply, clutching her clipboard tighter, like it could protect her from what was coming next. Ma'am, Jake said, his voice calm but dripping with humor. The man you called 911 about is the same man who answered your 911 call. Karen blinked, confused. What do you mean? Jake crossed his arms, leaning against the hood of his cruiser. He's the county dispatcher. The guy you talked to on the phone, the one who took your report, that was him. You called 911 to report him to him. For a second, she didn't move. She just stood there, the wind rustling the papers on her clipboard, her sunglasses reflecting the water behind Jake. Then slowly, her mouth fell open. That can't be true, she said faintly. You're joking. Nope, Jake said with a grin. I'm not joking. You described him perfectly. Plaid shirt, brown hat, silver truck. Matches his description to a T. You even gave us the right location. Karen's face went through every shade of red known to mankind. First pink, then crimson, then full-on stop sign red. You could tell she wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come out. I didn't know, she stammered finally. He didn't tell me. Jake laughed softly. Well, he was at work. He's a professional, ma'am. Probably didn't want to embarrass you. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking utterly defeated. Oh my, she whispered. Jake gave her a polite nod. No harm done. I'll let him know you were just being thorough. Karen's pride deflated faster than a balloon in a bonfire. So, I'm not going to get in trouble, am I? Jake shook his head, still grinning. No, ma'am. Just maybe next time, double-check the property lines before you call 911. She didn't say a word. She just turned slowly, climbed back into her white SUV, and shut the door. The engine started, and she backed out with the quietest reverse I've ever heard. No dramatic tire spin this time. Just the gentle crunch of gravel and the sound of her pride being left behind in the dust. Jake radioed back to me a few minutes later. Dispatch, situation resolved. Caller advised. No crime committed. Copy that, 3 to 14. I said, trying not to laugh into the mic. Good work, deputy. He chuckled. Oh, you owe me lunch for this one. Deal, I said. And as I logged the call into the system, the most satisfying case closed I'd ever typed. I leaned back in my chair and thought to myself, if karma were a movie, that scene would have won an Oscar. When Jake told me what happened, I nearly fell out of my chair laughing. I mean, I've heard some wild stories working in dispatch, calls about raccoons in chimneys, folks thinking the moon was a UFO, one guy reporting his own cat for breaking curfew. But this took the cake. Jake came strolling into the office later that evening, still in uniform, grinning like a man who'd just witnessed the funniest scene of his career. He tossed his hat onto the counter, leaned on my desk, and said, You owe me lunch, and maybe a medal, because, buddy, that was pure gold. I spun around in my chair, Already laughing. All right, spill it. What did she do? He chuckled, shaking his head. Man, you should have seen her face. I told her the property was yours, and she froze like I just told her she was standing on the moon. You could see the gears in her brain trying to reverse engineer everything she thought she knew. I was grinning ear to ear. No way. Oh, it gets better, he said, pulling up a chair like he was about to tell a campfire story. She looks at me, all stiff and proper, and goes, "Wait, he works for 911? At that point, I lost it. I actually had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing too loud in the dispatch center. The idea of her calling the cops on me, and me being the one who picked up, was just too perfect. Jake nodded, confirming my laughter with his own. Yup, I told her. Yes, ma'am. He's the dispatcher you spoke with. You literally described him to himself. She didn't. I said, slapping the desk, tears forming in my eyes. Oh, she did. Jake said, laughing harder. And when I told her, she got this look, like someone just unplugged her brain. Total system reboot. She stood there, blinking, trying to figure out how the universe had just turned on her. I could picture it perfectly. Karen, standing by the lake, her hair perfectly sprayed, her sunglasses crooked from the shock, that clipboard still clutched like it was her last line of defense against reality. Jake continued. Then she tried to recover, make it sound like it was all a misunderstanding. She starts mumbling about miscommunication and boundaries being confusing. She even said something about how maybe the maps she had were outdated. I laughed so hard my chair squeaked backward. Oh no, she didn't. Oh, she did, Jake said, smirking. She started doing that classic HOA thing, trying to spin it around, make it sound like you were the one who didn't explain yourself properly. I almost felt bad for her. Almost, I said, still laughing. He nodded. Almost. But then she huffed, straightened her jacket, and stormed back to her SUV like she was about to write the angriest email of her life. I leaned forward. What? She didn't apologize. Jake snorted. Apologize? Please. This is Karen we're talking about. She just said, and I quote, "Well, I suppose that's a lesson in communication for everyone involved." I threw my head back laughing. Everyone involved. She's out here acting like she's on some diplomatic peace mission. Jake was laughing now too, shaking his head. And then she slammed her car door, revved up that white SUV like it was a NASCAR race, and peeled out of there so fast she almost kicked gravel into the lake she swore belonged to her HOA. I could barely breathe from laughing. You're kidding me. He grinned. Not even a little. I had to step back or I would have eaten a mouthful of dust. She took off like she was fleeing the scene of a bad decision. I imagined the scene perfectly. The tire spinning, the crunch of gravel spraying up, the reflection of her SUV shrinking down the road while Jake stood there, hands on his hips, trying not to laugh. The whole thing was like a sitcom in real life. Jake leaned back in his chair, still chuckling. Man, the way she drove off. I think she realized halfway down the road that she might have just called the cops on a county employee. She's lucky we don't charge for irony. Oh, she's never living that down, I said. You just know she's going to tell her HOA board it was some kind of misunderstanding, technical issue with dispatch, or something like that. He nodded. Oh yeah, she's already rewriting history in her head. Probably going to call an emergency meeting to reassess community boundaries. We both burst out laughing again, the kind of laughter that only comes from watching karma play out in real time. Then Jake looked at me with that mischievous grin he always gets. So, what are you going to do next time she shows up? I smirked. Next time she sets foot near that lake, I'm putting up a sign that says, "Private property. Trespassers will be dispatched." Jake laughed so hard he nearly dropped his radio. You've got to do it. Please tell me you'll do it. Oh, absolutely, I said, grinning. It's only fair. He stood, still chuckling, and clapped me on the shoulder. Well, all in a day's work, I guess. You handled that one like a champ. Most people don't get the privilege of answering their own 911 call. Hey, I said, shrugging. Not everyone gets to live the dream. As Jake walked out, I leaned back in my chair again, looking at the dispatch board and shaking my head with a smile. I replayed the whole thing in my mind, me sitting there, completely unaware she was calling about me, her describing me to myself, Jake showing up and dropping the truth bomb that would haunt her HOA meetings for months. And honestly, I couldn't have planned it better if I tried. Somewhere out there, Karen was probably drafting a long, angry email to the county, maybe even flipping through those same papers, highlighting lines that proved she was half right. But deep down, she knew she'd messed up big time. And me, I was just glad to have the best story of my career, one that would make every dispatcher laugh for years to come. Because, at the end of the day, you can't make this stuff up. You can't script irony like that. You can't plan for karma that precise. Sometimes, it just rolls in like a white SUV with a clipboard and drives away in a cloud of gravel and embarrassment. A week later, I got a letter from the HOA board. It was a half-hearted apology, saying they regretted the misunderstanding and that they'd update their maps. I framed that letter and hung it right next to my fishing rod. Now, every time I cast a line, I look across the lake and smile. Because sometimes karma doesn't need time. It just needs a good laugh and a little irony. And here's the best part. A few months later, the county rezoned the area. My property and the lake were officially outside the HOA boundaries. So now, no one but me can fish there. To this day, whenever I'm at work and hear a caller getting dramatic, I think of Karen and that unforgettable line. 911, what's your emergency? Oh, just an HOA president trying to evict a man from his own land.